Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit. I am excited to be sharing with you some contemplations, reflections, and thoughts for the coming week. This is for the week of June 17, 2024. As always, I invite you to feel into your own body, your heart, and your intuitive knowing, and to trust that whatever is coming up as you are listening to me is exactly what you're here to listen to and what you're here to know. All right, let's get to it. On Monday, the 17th, we have Venus entering Cancer. We have Mercury in Gemini squaring Neptune in Pisces. And then Mercury enters Cancer. And Mercury will then conjoin Venus in Cancer. On Thursday, the 20th, the Sun in Gemini will square Neptune in Pisces. And the Sun will enter Cancer. And so begins Cancer season. On Saturday, the 21st, Mercury in Cancer will sextile Mars in Taurus. And then we have a full moon in Capricorn. And on Sunday, the 22nd, Mercury in Cancer will square the North Node in Aries. So intuitively, just looking at the lineup as I was kind of writing it down and feeling into it, I was hearing the song that some of you may know. I may be dating myself here. But I believe it's called More Than Words, and it goes something like, and I'm really thinking about the first line of that song here. It goes something like, saying I love you is not the words I want to hear from you. There's something here about the idea of expressing ourselves more than what words can convey. There's something here about going a step deeper, a layer deeper, beyond the mental conception that words can describe or can transmit. There's a very different energy coming in this week than the rest of the energy that we've been experiencing the past few weeks, right? The past few weeks have been a massively Gemini season. Like we've had a very, very Gemini season, right? The moment Mercury enters Gemini, it's like a whole Gemini party, and it's just like, it's so hard on the Gemini side, right? It's like continuing to just like really double down on that Gemini energy. And to me, what's interesting, I've talked about this numerous times if you've been following, is 2024 really feels like so special because each time the Sun enters a particular sign, we immediately get a stellium in that sign, right? And Cancer season is no exception. We have Venus in Cancer, we have Mercury in Cancer, and we have the Sun in Cancer, right? Just within the first week. This transition between Gemini, which is a mutable air sign ruled by Mercury, Gemini is the trickster, right? Gemini is a young energy. It kind of has this upper energy, into Cancer, which is a cardinal sign ruled by the moon, which is the mother, the nurturer. On the surface, they look like totally different genres, right? My pop music mind goes from like Kendrick Lamar to Lana Del Rey, right? You get the gist here. We're going from excited kind of like rap music with a lot of words, right, into like languid, fluid, melancholic music. But there are similarities too. If we look at the significations of Mercury and the moon, First of all, they are both relatively fast-moving planets in astrology. Mercury's agenda is to connect. Mercury wants to disperse information. Mercury wants to move the plot along. Whereas the moon is more interested in reflecting, is more interested in dispensing rather than dispersing, right? And the moon is more interested in feeding. There's a quality about the moon that is primarily interested in nourishment and in deeper embodiment. Overall, I would say this week is a gradual transition into what feels like a pretty mellow and reflective time. There's potential for emotions to come up to the surface as we are slowing down. And to me, Cancer energy is also much more keyed in to the nonverbal, to the energetic ways of communicating. Cancer has no problems with words. In more ancient traditions, the moon, which is the ruler of Cancer, is also associated with writers. But when contrasted with Gemini energy, Cancer is more about expressions. Cancer is more about the communications of feelings and perceptions that live deeper underneath the surface. This is very interesting because to me, Cancer can be very verbose with their words, right? Cancer energy can be really poetic with their usage of words, but it's often really trying to share something that's much more energetic, right? Something that's much more esoteric, maybe something that's much more emotional, right? Rather than Gemini energy. Gemini is primarily just interested in a bunch of facts, right? That thrown together creates an interesting collage. Whereas Cancer is really trying to point to impressions, right? Point to feelings, point to ripples that are kind of going underneath the surface. The moon energy is more about moving the energy along through exploring what's underneath the surface, through poking it out a little bit and therefore creating space for it to breathe and to evolve. On a practical level, it may be helpful to be mindful of all the ways that we communicate beyond the verbal. How are you communicating with your subtle energy? How are you communicating with your innermost thoughts? How are you communicating with your facial expressions, with the movements of your hands, with your body language? And once we key into this dimension, which I feel like a lot of us, especially if we either grew up in the West or we live in the West, may not be fully keyed into, there's a very verbal way of moving through the world that we are accustomed to, especially if you live in the United States. And I think that once we become more keyed into these ways of being, we can start experimenting with this. What happens when I slow down the torrential downpour of my words, of my conceptual and verbal hurricane, and kind of drop deeper into my feeling sense, right? What happens if I try to communicate with others more by using my body, by cultivating my private thoughts, and even maybe by my actions, right? Rather than like what I say. There's something also that I think is so personal about Cancer energy. I'm thinking about a specific example here, which is what constitutes as acts of care are not really beholden or tied to any sort of standard definition, right? Very often our definition of care is deeply impacted by our experiences as children. What did we get as children? What did we not get? What did we want but were made to feel that we cannot want, right? usually these things become our standards of care, because it's much easier to orient towards caring for another person in ways that we wish we had been cared for, right? And I think part of cultivating a grounded relationship with reality, in other words, interacting with life as it is rather than through the lens of how we think life should be, or through the lens of how others think that we should be. Part of that cultivation is to really hone in on what the situation in front of us is calling for us to do, right? So, in other words, rather than assuming that someone wants a certain type of care, maybe we can have a conversation about it, right? Maybe we can kind of slow down and ask, hey, I'm feeling like this desire or this drive to want to take you out to a restaurant. Does that feel like something that can reliably express my care for you? Will that be received as care for you, right? This isn't something that is part of how we orient, I think, at least in a lot of cultures that I know, right? We like to believe that mind reading is a worthy endeavor, but I think an equally worthy endeavor is communication, right? Is checking in, is creating space for us to have conversations about how certain things are landing or not landing, right? So, in a sense, Mercury and the Moon are incredible allies, right? Because both of them are planets, archetypes, energies that can code switch really quickly. What does it mean to take a moment to really check in with yourself and to check in with whoever you are relating to, right? Human or non-human, about what you need to know, what the next steps are, and maybe that takes a little bit more effort and takes a little bit more coordination. But I think during a week like this coming week, and maybe throughout Cancer season in general, I think there's something so valuable about allowing ourselves to really be with others and kind of getting on the same page, right? On an energetic, emotional level. Going within, going into the land of the High Priestess is also something that I would suggest for this time, especially with the full moon in Capricorn that we have on Saturday. I think this is a great time to consider what you might want to have built by the time that the sun enters Capricorn in late December, and then to maybe spend some time thinking about, one, why you want to do the thing that you want to do, right? In other words, why is it personally important to you? Number two, what do you want to see happen and what do you not want to see happen, right? This is a practice that I've been kind of learning to be more disciplined about. When it comes to visioning, right? When it comes to planning, I found it to be deeply helpful to think about, what do I not want to see happen, right? This is something that I learned from one of my mentors, Michelle Pelizon. And once I started implementing it, honestly, it's kind of a game changer. It seems so simple, but I don't think a lot of us think enough about what we don't want to happen. Because once we start making space for that, once we start thinking about that, our whole being can orient in such different ways, right? It's really easy at the beginning of projects when we're starting something new or when we're planting new seeds for what we want to see happen or given birth to in the world, to be so optimistic about our capacity and about our desires. And I think this kind of adds a little bit of a truth serum here, right? Another question you may want to consider is, what resources or support might you need? Oftentimes, I think especially when we are starting something new or we're working with a new seed of intention, we can underestimate the amount of resources and support that we need to actually make it happen. I think this is why a lot of projects end up failing, because there often can be an underlying sense of, I need to be able to do this myself in order to make it worth it, right? So if you need any sort of hall pass or permission, I'm giving one to you, which is that there is no shame in enlisting support. In fact, giving yourself the kind of support that you need in order to have the kind of expansion you want to have, or to build the kind of containers that you want to build, is perhaps one of the wisest things you can do, and one of the most compassionate things you can do for yourself. So think about, what are some of the ways I can resource myself, nourish myself, fortify myself in order to be able to see this through to completion, right, within the next 6 months or so. And finally, what desires and needs might you have around this goal? This is interesting because to me, the desires and needs piece is a little bit different than asking the first question, which is, what is personally important to you, right? This is speaking more to, at least for me, like a primordial drive here, right? Getting to know the shape of that primordial drive. Why is this the intention that you are picking for this particular full moon in Capricorn, right? Why not some other intention? Why, on what existential level is this project, is this intention scratching an itch for you, right? What are you trying to explore here? What curriculum might you be learning here, right? Might you really crave to be putting yourself through, right? Because again, very often the process of making something happen is a process. It's not something that just gets dropped right from the skies. And my suspicion is that for many of us, what's interesting is that process. Many of us are interested in the trip. Many of us are interested in a transformation. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be listening to a podcast like this one, right? And so honoring that and really getting to know, starting to build a pathway of communication with that desire and with those deeper underlying needs may be something that is really illuminating, and something that can really go a long way in helping you actually achieve what you want to achieve by the new moon in Capricorn later this year. You can choose to engage with these questions in trance states, right? Maybe meditating on them, or maybe asking your guides or the Akashic records if you have a relationship with that consciousness. You may want to create a ritual, or you may be wanting to give offerings during this full moon. All of these things are deeply supported. And in my opinion, as we are deepening into this very Cancerian Cancer season, all of these are really powerful things that you may want to engage with, right? There's potential for heightened intuition. There's potential for heightened perception here. Okay, that's it from me by way of contemplation. I hope this is helpful in terms of helping you kind of chart this transition between Gemini season to Cancer season. And if any of you would like to work with me one-on-one, I would be so excited to do that. My books are finally reopening starting this week. And so if you would like to consult the astrology, or look at some divination tools, or do some subtle energy work, Akashic work, I would love to hold space for you, and I would love to see you. All right. Thank you very much. I'm sending you so much love, and I hope that this week is beautiful for you. Thank you.